Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me all right? Fantastic. Well, it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you for that introduction. I'd really love to spend hours with you talking about these important issues about our mental health as parents, as people on the planet, and what we can do to create the experiences for children so that they thrive. But in this short 30 to 40 minute time, and then we'll have time for Q&A, what I'd like to do is just present to you some basic knowledge that comes from science. So the field I work in is called Interpersonal Neurobiology. So we combine all the fields of science, so anthropology, sociology, linguistics, psychology, biology, including neuroscience and genetics, chemistry, physics, and math, all into one framework. And there's over 75 textbooks that I've overseen the publication of. So if you want the science, it's all there. And then what I get to do, either on my own or with my students and now colleagues, is to translate that science, that interdisciplinary science, for parents to use. So everything I'm going to be presenting to you this afternoon is really all derived from a deep synthesis of all the fields of science. And there are all those textbooks if you want to read more. But for this talk, I'm going to actually address 4 different categories of things. And if you're having a mind that likes to know what we're going to do, here's what we're going to do. We're going to cover 4 S's, 3 P's, 2 R's, and 1 M. So as we go through, you may want to say, okay, I know there's 4 S's, so what actually are they? What are those S's? And I know there are 3 P's. Now, you probably already know the P's because it's in the title of the talk. And then there are 2 R's. You may have no idea what those are, and 1 M. So let's get ready to dive in. Let's do the S's first, though. I'm trained in what's called attachment research, which means we study the way parents interact with their children across cultures all around the planet. And we look at what the universal findings are for what helps children thrive. Now, of course, parenting is different in different cultures, but you can actually find in a scientific way what the universals are. And it comes down to actually 4 S's. So here are the S's. I may quiz you at the end, so get ready for these. The first is seen. S-E-E-N, seen. And what seen means is that a child, starting from infancy on, needs to have their inner mental life attended to by the caregiver. Now, we'll use the word parent, but our species actually has something called alloparenting, which means not only do the birth parents, the mother and the father, care for the infant, but actually we evolved to share child rearing with trusted others. And there's some beautiful books by Sarah Hrdy, H-R-D-Y. One of them is called Mothers and Others, looking at this history of how, in fact, we share child rearing. So the first thing is that no matter who the caregiver is, I'll just use the word parent for, usually it's an adult, but it can be an adolescent, who's caring for the child. That child needs to be seen by the caregiver. Now, as we go through the experience of being seen, what's the feeling when someone actually sees your emotions or your memories or what you're thinking or the meaning of something for you? Well, one way a person I was working with described that as the feeling that we have that's called feeling felt. You feel like another person really knows you. So not just that they're responding to your behavior, but they're actually seeing the inner mental life of feelings and thoughts and things like that. Your mind includes your subjective experience. And if someone is just paying attention to your outer behavior, they're actually not seeing you. And about 20% of the population, in the US at least, has parents who don't see their children. It's quite remarkable. We can study those parent-child relationships and show that it has a definite impact on the way that child develops if that's their primary attachment relationship. So the first S is seen. The next S is soothed. What soothed means is that if I'm your child and I'm distressed, you're going to do something, not only see what's going on with me, but now you're going to carry out an action that helps me feel calmer. So I go from a state of distress, which can be either in the form of chaotic explosions or rigid shutting down. Either of those, chaos or rigidity, are ways that children could be out of equilibrium and in a state of distress. And you notice that, and now you behave in such a way that I feel better. What I learn as your child is that I can be in a state of distress, but with your guidance early on in my childhood, I learn I can feel better. And what happens is I take those experiences and I actually change the structure of my brain. And I build in the circuitries of what's called self-regulation based on relational experiences. So relationships are a form of experience, and they change the structure of our brains. That probably happens throughout the lifespan, but especially in childhood when the brain is developing a lot, and even during adolescence when it's remodeling, these relationships are crucially important for developing what I call integration in the brain, the way different parts of the brain are linked. Okay, so the first two S's are seen and soothed. The third S is the S of safety. The whole attachment system is designed to protect the child. And if we didn't have it, because as mammals, we actually come out pretty immature, as humans, we're the most immature of all infants. And so we need the protection of our caregiver. There's two kinds of safety in this S. One is that we're protected from harm. The other is that we, as the parents, are not the source of terror. So unfortunately, somewhere between 5 and 15% of the non-clinical US population has an experience with a caregiver where the caregiver is terrifying them. Now you may say, well, come on, of course that happens like with abuse or neglect, that's true, but even when there's not abuse and neglect, if someone comes home and is raging in the other room, that's terrifying for a child. If a parent comes home and gets drunk and in that altered state is terrifying, that's terrifying for a child. And that wouldn't be included under the term abuse or neglect, but it still would be terrifying. So these two forms of safety, protecting from harm and not being a source of terror, are what we mean by safe. So let's review the three S's. Safe, soothed, seen. Very good, seen. Now, your hippocampus in your brain is going to love if I involve you in trying to memorize these things, because if you passively sit there, whether you're watching this video or here in the room, you are going to not learn as much as if you actively take part in an experience like this. And as an educator or a therapist, I'm always wanting to engage people. So that's why we have these numbers we're doing. So the fourth S of this sequence is if you have the experience of being seen, the experience of being soothed, and the experience of being safe on a reliable basis. And when there are ruptures to those three S's and they're repaired, so there's no such thing as perfect parenting. So even though we're making this list of all these S's, the fact is there's no such thing as perfect parenting. So if I said just the word repair for the rest of the time here, it probably would be a very effective thing because we're too hard on ourselves as parents. We think there's supposed to be something perfect, like there's a science of it, or even me as someone who studies this stuff and does research in it, you'd think I'm doing it right. But the reason in all my parenting books I write, or my colleagues and I both write, how we each do it, we flub up because there's no such thing as perfect parenting. But at least if we know the general direction we're going, and when we veer off of that because we're having a bad day, we're tired, we miss the opportunity to connect or soothe, when we realize that, we can make a repair. And a repair involves recognizing what we've done, taking a deep breath and being kind to ourselves, and saying, you know something, that was a mistake, and I need to go back and make a reconnection because I didn't see my child, I didn't soothe my child, or my child wasn't safe. And if I can make repair when there are the ruptures, and for the most part I try to offer these three S's on a reliable basis, I get the fourth S, which is called security. And secure attachment is a kind of vaccination. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it's kind of a vaccination that supports the development of resilience. Other things can happen, temperament, accidents, infections, all sorts of things can happen to the brain so that a child, when they get older, going through adolescence especially, can have hard times. But all the research shows that children who have a secure attachment are the most likely to have resilience through the rocky period of adolescence and then into adulthood. So a colleague of mine, Alan Strofe, who I'm going to see tomorrow in Minnesota, what Alan and his colleagues have shown in a study that's gone over 40 years. So these little babies were first studied actually before they were even out in the world, when the mothers were pregnant. They then studied the relationship between the caregivers and this little baby, and this little baby is now in their mid-40s. And you can show that how parents communicate with these S's shapes how that 40-year-old has resilience or not. It's remarkable. But it's kind of understandable because these relationships are shaping the structure of that child's brain in a way that forms a foundation, like of a building. And the building, if the foundation is strong, will be strong no matter what kind of storms happen. So let's review the 4 S's. If you have which 3 S's do you get the 4th S of security? Safe, seen, soothed. Excellent. And can you ever have a rupture and repair it? Yes. And that's the most important thing to remember, is that there's no such thing as perfect parenting, but you can move your way to making a repair when these S's are ruptured. Now let's go to now the 3 Ps of this talk. The 3 Ps are in the title of the talk, which is presence, parenting, and the planet. And these may seem like 3 completely distinct things. And when Laura asked me to come here, which thank you for inviting me, you know, I wanted, since this is a YouTube talk and it's for people who really like challenges and like to think, you know, I wanted to put out a title that could have you go, what? What is presence? Which has to do with a way we actually, in research terms, study if someone is aware of what's happening as it's happening. That has what's called a receptive awareness. Some people would call it mindful awareness. And a research center I helped found at UCLA, we study how mindful awareness actually brings all sorts of positive changes into adults' lives. Or even in adolescents and adults who have attention challenges, we can show that if you give mindful awareness training, you can actually take people who look like they have attention problems and have them have more improvements than if they were taking medications. So presence is something you can cultivate. It's not something you either have or don't have. And if you go all around the planet and had to come up with one word that summarized the kind of parent who provides secure attachment for their kid, it would be parents who have presence. And for me, this was absolutely fascinating. Like, why would having open awareness be like that? So just across the bay here in Berkeley is one of the world's leaders in attachment research. And we had 30 of our colleagues got together for a week to talk about the future of attachment research. This was Mary, Maine. And we were all gathered there at Berkeley, and we were talking about what have we found in the last 30 years of research, what should we do for the next 30 years, and it was really exciting. And what I can tell you is that presence of the parent's mind is the predictor of whether you're going to have those 4 S's. So that's pretty cool, because if you're a parent listening to this, you may say, well, how do I get that? And the answer is, there's a way to get that. There's a book I wrote called Aware, which summarizes the research on presence and gives you actually a technique called the wheel of awareness, where if you think about a wheel with a center hub, where's the knowing of being aware, and on the outer rim in this metaphor of the mind are all the things you can be aware of. Like if I say, good afternoon, how many of you know I said good afternoon? Raise your hand so I can see. Great. So you have 2 things happening there. On the rim, you have the sound, good afternoon, or if you're reading a transcript of this, you see the words, good afternoon, in your eyes. But how many of you realize that you not only have those knowns, but you also have the knowing. The knowing is awareness. So parents who have presence are able to distinguish the rim from the hub, basically. So let's say I'm interacting with my daughter or my son. Now they're young adults, but when they were young. And let's say I didn't have presence, right? And let's say they're in the bathtub. This is an actual example. I don't usually talk about this particular example, but in my case, the hot button trigger for me is to be ignored, because that happened in my childhood. And so it's like gets me all revved up and I can't stay in what's called an integrated state. I'm no longer present. So let's say they were in the bathtub taking a bath and I say, okay, 2-minute warning, dinner's ready, 2 minutes, you got to get out of the bathtub, and they're playing. Okay, 1 minute, I want you to get out now and dry off, 30 seconds, and now they're still playing in the bathtub. So I'm being ignored by them. In the old days, before I was thinking about all these things, I might flip my lid. So if you take your hand and put your thumb in the middle, put your hands over, try this out. Put your thumb in the middle, put your fingers around like that. When you have presence, this whole system of your brain, which is in your head like that, is in what's called an integrated state. And there's a ton of research behind what I'm going to say, so it may sound kind of glib to just say it so easily, but believe me, there's a lot of science behind this. This integrated brain is flexible and adaptive, right? So a parent with presence in that situation would say certain things that I'll tell you in a moment. But before I realized all this, this was a hot button for me. So the cortex at the top of this brain, which allows flexibility, and beneath the cortex are the areas including the amygdala and the hippocampus. These are part of the limbic area, which can store all sorts of memories of, let's say, being invisible as a kid. And then beneath that, in the brainstem, are the fight, flight, freeze, and faint networks of responding to threat. So when the limbic area and the brainstem are collectively working together to respond to what the cortex has evaluated as a threat, then you can flip your lid. Any parents here ever do that? Where suddenly you go from being flexible to being inflexible. You go from being kind and relaxed to being outraged. Anybody ever do that? No one's going to raise their hand. I'll raise my hand. And so what happened to me early on, even though I was an attachment researcher, was having these flip your lid experiences. So I had to look into the brain to see how does that happen. Now, with self-understanding, which means having presence for what goes on inside of you, I could realize my kids are ignoring me. Being ignored is a hot button issue for me. For my wife, it would be a completely different issue. Being ignored doesn't bother her. In fact, she likes being ignored because they give her some quiet time because she had a very busy house. And so that's cool for her. And she knows what my hot button issues are, and I know what hers are. And so we try not to push on them. You're saying, oh yeah, good, then you can push on them. No, you try not to push on them. So for my kids, I would say, my being ignored is not something that feels good. And I would actually go like this, and I would say, my brainstem and limbic area are working together, and I'm about to flip my lid. I need you to get out of the bathtub. And once they saw me talking about the amygdala, they knew it was time to get out of the bathtub. That was just my way of doing it. But you don't want to flip your lid, because when you flip your lid and become unintegrated, you're no longer present. You're absent. You're on automatic pilot. You don't have receptive awareness anymore, which comes from an integrated brain. Now you're just responding by old memories. And the reason Parenting from the Inside Out was the first book I wrote with Mary Hartzell, the first book I would write on parenting, is because that's what the science shows based on Mary Main's work. The number one way you can be present is to make sense of how your past shaped your development from your childhood and adolescence into adulthood. And she has extensive research across all sorts of cultures that we study this in to show that the best predictor of your child having secure attachment isn't whether you had a secure attachment, it's whether you've made sense of your experiences. So someone could have had a horrible set of abusive experiences, done the work to make sense of their past. How? Parenting from the Inside Out is a guide to do that. Then what happens is they now have this integrated brain because they've resolved their traumas, and now they remain present even in challenging times when the hot button is being pushed. So presence is actually a state of mind you can develop. For parenting, the second P, and we've already said your goal in parenting is to provide these 4 S's. So we've already reviewed what that is. Why do I have the third P in there, planet? The reason I have the third P there in the planet is because, and this is really sad to talk about this, and you probably know this, so I'm not saying anything new, but if you hang out with, kids, whether they're young kids or adolescents, I just did a conference where an 8-year-old was brought from up here in San Francisco down to LA. I brought him on stage with me. And I had Paul Hawken there, wrote Drawdown about really trying to work with the planet's health. Louis Schwartzberg showing films about the planet. And so this little boy, Max, got up on stage with me. And I said, Max, can you tell us what's going on? And he said, yeah, I want to tell everybody why my mom brought me here. And I go, let's tell the story. And so we had just watched Greta Thunberg from Sweden, the little clip of her on YouTube, talking to the European Parliament. And so Max is now and she's 16. Max is on the stage with me, and he goes, I was walking on Stinson Beach, and there was all this trash, and I started to cry. And I said to my mom, something's wrong, something's wrong. Why are we trashing up this world? And she said, I'm taking you down to LA, where they're doing a thing on basically awareness and the planet's well-being. Because for Max to say that as an 8-year-old, and the group was very supportive of him, he's not speaking by himself. This world, as Bill Nye, the science guy, said recently, we just watched this also on YouTube, the world is on fire. And as Greta said it, our house is on fire. We have about a dozen years to deeply look at what's going on and turn the path we're on of destruction, possibly, underline possibly, in a positive direction. Your kids, whether you know it or not, are feeling the unbelievable terror of a world on fire. So for many of you, when I'm looking at your ages, you're a little younger than me. You probably didn't have to worry about all the nuclear, bombs that we were afraid was going to blow up. But now you know that there's something really not right on this planet. And if we don't have our children fall in love with nature, they're going to have no motivation to save nature. None. We don't have to go try to help the planet out of fear or guilt. We need to really protect the planet out of love. And so the planet of these 3 Ps is that your job as parents is to actually go beyond, and now we get to the 2 Rs. So what are the 3 Ps? Let's hear them. Presence, parenting, and the planet. Your job is to raise a child who's resilient and can thrive and be happy and playful and joyful and creative, yes. But now we get to the 2 Rs, and this relates to both your child and you. The 2 Rs are the brain, and this is in the Yes Brain book that you have. The brain has 2 fundamental states it gets into. They both start with an R, so these are your 2 Rs. One is if I say the word, and I don't know if I should do it. Maybe I should do it. Should I do the exercise? Okay, put your stuff down, and we'll just takes a few moments. I'm going to say a word. I'm going to repeat it several times. This evokes one state. Then we'll take a pause, and then I'll say another word, and it evokes the other state. So you'll experience the R's from the inside out, if you will. You ready? Thumbs up? Okay, here we go. So your job is just feel whatever you feel. My job is to walk you through this. Here we go. No. 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 Yes. 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 Now try taking a nice deep breath. And try putting one hand on your chest and one hand on your abdomen. And just put some gentle pressure. And just let some nice deep breaths come in and out. Some gentle pressure. Eyes open or eyes closed, whatever works for you. And just to compare that, try putting the hand on your chest on your abdomen and the one on your abdomen to your chest. Nice deep breaths. Excellent. See how that feels? And just put it whichever way may have been the most comforting. Left on top, right on top, whatever works for you is fine. Put some nice gentle pressure. Excellent. And you can leave your hands there or just put them down. So let's just do a quick survey, and this is the scientist in me that can't help myself. How many of you felt that putting a hand on your chest and a hand on your abdomen was comforting in some way? Just raise your hand really high so I can see. Raise your hand really, really high. Okay, so it's the majority of people. How many felt right on type was the most comforting? Raise your hand really high so we can just get a rough. Okay, so that's like 80% of them. Left, hand on top. Okay, right, so that's much less. And how many found left and right were about the same? Okay, I don't know why. Someone should get a PhD on this. It's always about that. Over 90% of people find it comforting. It's usually, 75% or more are right on top people, and the rest are left on top or both. No one knows why. But if you do the study of it, when it is comforting for you, at least the study of one person, me, when you hook yourself up to electrophysiological gadgets, you become more integrated. That's what comforting is. An integrated state is that calm, receptive state. Now, just if you don't mind, throw out some words. What did no feel like when I said no harshly several times? Just throw out some words. Annoying. Startling. Angry. Tense. Scary. Hateful. Abrasive. Is there a hand back there? Okay. So those are all descriptions of a reactive state that relate to our deep history of fight, flight, freeze, and faint. And you can activate them very simply with a harsh no. Now, in contrast, what did yes feel like? Let's throw out some words. Soothing. Calming. Calming. What's that? Relieved. A hug. Okay. And these, yes? I know, not enough to make for the nose. I'm not going to trust this guy. Absolutely, right. It takes a lot more. That's why we did the hand thing. Did the hand thing help you a little bit? A little bit, okay. Are you still, do you need some support? You're good, okay. No, because it's tough. It's tough. I do this actually with my patients just to test for self-regulation in a kid. Some kids, when you do the no, they'll jump off the couch and attack you. Or if I have a parent say it to a kid, just to see how the two of them are doing, the kid will come up and start choking the parent. That no activates a whole deep survival thing that's probably about 300 million years old. So it's way older than anything the cortex is doing. So it's hard to ignore it. That's the reactive state of threat. For some of you, and I'm sorry, it may have still lasted for you, but to transfer from that reactive state of fight, flight, freeze, or faint into the receptive state of yes, which is a state more of soothing, calming, connecting, it's an openness, is an important thing to do. So the two R's to remember as a parent is you yourself can be reactive, or you yourself can be receptive. And what we want to do is know our own state, because you cannot effectively parent from a reactive state of mind. So in my case, I would get reactive if I was ignored. So if the kids in the bathtub were about to get a very reactive father, that's not helpful parenting. They're not being seen, they're not being soothed, and they're being terrified. When we become reactive, it's often obliterating those three S's. And so we have to make a repair. The first part of the repair is move ourselves from reactivity to receptivity. Now, one time I was teaching in a workshop, and the next day, our daughters were in preschool together. One of the moms in the workshop came and said, that was so helpful to understand. I flipped my lid. And I said, what was so helpful about it? She goes, because I've been flipping my lid every day of my child's life. And I didn't realize that my brain was going like this, and I was flipping my lid, I now know it isn't my fault, but it is my responsibility. And it was so interesting to realize that if you teach parents about what's going on in their brains, they can be kinder to themselves. So it isn't excusing the behavior, it's explaining the behavior. So instead of, this mom said to me, next, she thought she was a monster. She thought if she told anyone, she'd either be put in jail or in a hospital. But instead, what she came to realize, she was just a human being. And by understanding this, to be kind to herself was a helpful way to go from her own reactivity to receptivity to make sense of her life. Now, what are these two R's? You tell me. What are the two states you can get into? When you're threatened, you go into a reactive state, and when you're feeling calm and connecting, you get into a receptive state. Okay? So the 4 S's: seen, soothed, safe, and secure. The 3 P's are presence, parenting the planet. The 2 R's are reactive to receptive. And now we get to the 1 M, and then we'll open up for questions. You may not even be able to guess what this M is. Any guesses?
Mature.
Mature, well, yeah, that could be mature, but I actually worry about the word mature because we're always in a state of development across our lifespan. And even if you look at the essence of adolescence, which are these 4 features, if you look at the brain remodeling, some parents say, oh, adolescents should mature up and end their adolescent period, hurry up and get through this terrible period. It's just the opposite. The essence of adolescence, an emotional spark, social engagement, novelty seeking, and creative exploration. Those are the 4 fundamental features of what happens with an adolescent's remodeling brain. The research shows if you go through your mid to late 20s, when adolescence ends, into your 60s, 70s, 80s, holding on to that essence, you're going to actually have a healthier life, a healthier, more integrated brain. So I'm always worried about the word maturity, and if you ever read my textbook, The Developing Mind, I don't use the word maturity because we now know the brain grows throughout the lifespan. So you're always in a state of growth and openness to change. So that's why so that's not the M, but it's a good guess. Yeah. So here's what it is. And this is, this could be a long story, and, there are different conferences, either for therapists, I did this recently, or I did a very short talk for the Wisdom 2.0 thing for people here in Silicon Valley, so you can actually watch it at Wisdom's website. But basically it goes like this. If you had to ask me from the field of interpersonal neurobiology, what is the path forward we might consider as a question that we might want to take that's different from the one we're on? Because the one we're on, whether you're a parent raising the next generation or just a person who's a citizen of the planet, the path we're on is not working. We're now in something called the Anthropocene Era, where the human species is changing the face of the planet. And that by itself doesn't have to be bad, but it is bad. It's not only bad, it's actually lethal. As Bill Nye says, the planet is on fire. Your kids and your adolescents especially, they're feeling this. As some kids are saying who are marching now, we have no future unless we change the path forward. So this isn't just like, oh yeah, let's have our kids learn a new kind of way of playing this game or that game. We're talking about literally their existence in the future. So what could that new path forward? People ask me from the field of interpersonal neurobiology. One time the Dalai Lama asked me to address this question. I was like, I had no idea what to say to him. And so I looked deeply into all these different sciences across, anthropology, looking at different cultures, looking at what the fundamental basis is of how people mature into a sense of identity and all that kind of stuff. And here's, I think, what the problem is, and this would be the suggestion, and this is where the 1M comes from. We have worked in contemporary culture in a way that, unfortunately, my field of mental health and education has reinforced, that a 4-letter word the self, S-E-L-F, has been equated with your body. So when you're raising your daughter or you're raising your son, and you want to say, little Danny, let's say in my case, that the self of Danny lives in this body. And everything that this body is supposed to do, and even in science we have this term self-regulation, is regulate myself, self-actualization, actualize myself, be self-involved. It's all self-preoccupation. And through a ton of scientific studies that look at lots of different things, but one of them is called self-construal, you can show the brain, the stuff in between our ears, is extremely sensitive to the cultural messages you get. And the contemporary cultural message we've gotten is that the self is separate. It's an isolated self that is defined by the skin of the body. Now, that seems pretty innocuous, benign, not a big deal, right? Sure, the self is in the body. What's wrong with that? Well, first of all, it's a definition that is making children feel anxious and depressed. So it's leading to mental unhealth. And it's allowing someone, let's say, who develops the kind of self-motivation to do what you do in this culture, which is acquire all this stuff and acquire goods and maybe run a company or something. Now I'm running a factory, and my parents had all been told me, Danny, it's about you. Get a big bank account, get a big car, get a big house, get a big this, get a big that. And now I'm running a company, and it's a factory. And I know if I can make this factory work a certain way, then I'm going to make more money, right? That's the system we're in of contemporary culture. And it's all about this self getting as much stuff for this self as possible. Now, the forest around my factory, what do I care if I pollute it and destroy it? The oceans around my country, what do I care if I pollute them? Right? I just treat Earth like a trash can. The planet is like just the potty for a kid to dump their excrement. If we continue living with this view of a separate self, the predictions are dire about what your children are going to face just in about 24 years. You're already feeling it on the planet. So the M word that I want to suggest to you we think about is that, sure, you have a part of yourself that's inside the body. Let's call that an I or a me. But you also have a relational self that's not only connected to other people, but it's connected to the planet. Let's just call that an us or a we. So in our field, interpersonal neurobiology, we see integration as the fundamental basis of health on any scale. Health of the brain in your head, health of the brain connected to the whole body, health of the relationship between a parent and a child, health in a family, health in a school, health in a company, health in a country, health on a planet. And in all those different systems, I work with scientists and policymakers and governments around that, but integration is health. So I'm going to ask you, if integration is allowing things to be different and then bringing them together in linkage so you don't lose the differences, so it's more like a fruit salad than a smoothie, how would you integrate identity to go beyond the isolated, separate self? How would you maintain the idea that, yeah, there is a self that is internal, but there's also a self that's relational? How would you combine that? Well, one way to do it is me, the internal self, and we, the relational self, comes into one word that's spelled M-W-E, mui. So mui is the M word we're talking about. And if we start raising our children, our adolescents, and even ourselves to bust through the lethal lie of the separate self, then we have a chance to take the 4 S's and make them real, to actually take those 3 P's and be present and parent well in an integrated way to protect the planet, and then to go from reactivity, which the whole world is becoming now, nations, governments, everyone's becoming reactive, to realizing receptivity is where we need to be, and we can do this through an integrated identity of we. And that's what I hope is in front of all of us as we go forward. And I hope that these ideas will be helpful in your personal journey, in your professional work, and in the planetary health that's waiting for us to arrive. Thank you very much for your attention. So we have time for questions, and we also have time for questions from the outer world, the virtual world, or the actual world that's not in this physical space.
I'll ask a question from the Dory, the outer world. And those of you, again, can go /DanSiegel-Dory if you have questions. So this one says, they say that we need 3 positive experiences to offset 1 negative one. In couples, it's about 4-to-1 or 5-to-1, depending on your source. Has anybody looked at what this ratio is in the parent-child relationships from the perspective of the parent? We seem to expect close to perfection from our kids a lot of the time.
You know, it's a great question, Laura. Thank you, and thank you to the asker of the question. In the field of attachment, we do look at that kind of thing. We don't look at it so much as like what's the number of positive versus negative, but we look at the nature of the negative interaction. And in fact, we just had a meeting at Berkeley about this very topic. So that if the negative reaction is terrifying your child, that unfortunately, we were hoping this wouldn't be the case, even if the majority of things that are going on are secure attachment. You're seen, you're soothed, you're safe, and it's very rare that you're terrified. That leads to something called a disorganized attachment. We predicted decades ago that those kids would do much better than the ones who had a lot more negative stuff and just, you know, the same terrifying things, but in the setting of other negative things. It turns out that if you've had a parent who's terrifying you and there hasn't been a repair, decades later, there are going to be significant clinical findings, actually, of something called dissociation, difficulty with relationships, difficulty regulating your behavior, difficulty regulating your emotions, difficulty even reasoning under stress, that we believe, based on research, that are an outcome of those negative experiences. So, you know, parenting is a little different than just driving down the highway and someone screams at you, and that was my negative thing, so I need 3 positive things to make up for that. And certainly romantic relationships are different that way. But for a child who's developing negative things, and this is why we wrote the Yes Brain book, negative things actually have long-lasting things. So I wouldn't look at the number of it. I would look at the nature of it and how it lasts inside of a child, especially if it's terrifying.
Can you tell about a better way to respond to the kids in the bathtub?
Absolutely. So you would look at them, and you know, at this moment, of course, if you're about to flip your lid, the first step is you need to take care of yourself, because if I'm just screaming and yelling at them, it's actually not going to be helpful. They may get out of the bathtub, and their behavior may be what I was aiming for, but I haven't taught them the skill. So this question you're asking raises the first fundamental point, which is that a lot of people in English see the word discipline as punishment. But discipline actually means to teach. And you don't teach by punishing. Basically, when you punish, you're just demonstrating that you're kind of out of control. And you're just going to inflict pain on your child. So with discipline, what you're really trying to do is use an opportunity that's challenging, like the kids will get out of the bathtub, to actually teach them to regulate their behavior. So in that setting, what I would do is I would get down to their level. So instead of hovering above them, I would get down at their level, and I would say, you guys, you need to listen to me. Your dinner is done. I've given you 2 warnings. It's now time to get out. And I really don't want to get all agitated like I've done in the past. I don't want to do that anymore. You need to cooperate. Look me in the eye. They do, and out of the bathtub they go. Now, my wife and I had been teaching them what are called Mindsight skills anyway, where not in a moment like that, but we would talk to them about their feelings, their memories, the way their thinking was shaped by their memories and their feelings. And these are things you can do in any of the books I write. It's called basically Mindsight skills. And the research in attachment shows that parents who actually teach about the nature of the mind, the formal research term we use is reflective function. You teach about the nature of the mind. You are the teacher of your child, for the child to be aware of, this is what's going on in my thinking. This is what's going on in my feeling. And it's just like the famous Stanford study, you know, the marshmallow study. You have a kid who's given a marshmallow, and you said, if you can wait 3 minutes, I'll give you 2. I'll give you another one so you can take 2 home, right? And then they studied them decades later and showed the ones who could wait did great in life. The ones who couldn't wait didn't do great in life. And that is directly related to what you do in attachment. When you teach your child to be aware, I have a feeling like I really want to eat this marshmallow, but you know something? I'd rather have 2 than 1. I just need to wait 2 minutes. Even if it's something called self-talk, they go, I don't want to eat the marshmallow. I'm not going to eat the marshmallow. I'm not going to have the marshmallow. And they wait, or they sit on their hands or whatever. They're aware of an impulse. From the wheel of awareness point of view, what you're doing basically is teaching your child there's a spaciousness of awareness between impulse and action. And in that space, as Rollo May said, and Viktor Frankl is often attributed to this, in that space is where growth and development happen. For children who have parents who aren't seeing their mind, that's 20% of them, they don't have this space. They just eat the marshmallow. And you're not creating this Mindsight ability to have, basically, it's the basis of social and emotional intelligence. So that's what you want to do, is teach a Mindsight skill, but start with yourself. And that's the better way to do the bathtub story. And there are lots of stories in all of these books. Tina, Bryson, and I, and in the other book, Parenting from the Inside Out, Mary Hartzell and I would always put stuff, because parenting, I think, is the hardest job in the world. It's really, really hard. So at least we as parents should know the science about how what we do shapes the brain of our child. And to put it really simply, you're teaching Mindsight skills to your child so that even though it's tough, the tough times are the best times to actually be teaching. Not when you're flipping your lid, but realizing that what you may think is a burden is actually the opportunity to learn. And then now with a 25-year-old and 30-year-old, I can tell you, and that was Alex's Siegel, his music you were hearing earlier, you know, you can feel when you teach Mindsight skills, how your now adult child is going to take what you taught them in the bathtub and use it for social and emotional thriving in their life. That's skill building. You're a skill instructor. And yeah, you may feel like it's a burden, and it is the hardest job in the world, but what an opportunity. And you all have young children, I imagine, so I'll just say this. The days may feel short, because, you know, I'm sorry, the days may feel long, you know, it goes on and on forever, but the years are short. It goes by like that. And when I think about my 2 that used to be little ones at home, and I miss them like that, but now when I see what happens when you use these techniques for your attachment experiences with your kid, is they develop all these skills. It's skills of life. Next question. Yes?
You said that about 20% of parents are not present. What is typically the implications of that for kids down the line?
Yeah, so what the research shows is that actually it's probably more like 35 to 45% of parents are not present. The 20% I was referring to is one kind of not present, which was they're just not focusing on the inner life of the child. So that's one form of not present. The other 15 or more percent, those are parents who distort what they see. So they're trying to see inside. So an example would be of that kind would be, you know, my daughter's really hungry, let's say, but I'm really terrified that I won't be able to feed her well because I doubt my competence as a parent. I don't know if I'm going to do a good job, and I'm really worried, and maybe I can't do it. So now I'm really scared and nervous, and she's just hungry. So I'm trying to see what's going on with her, but I really can't. So I'm really trying. I said, she's hungry, and I shove the bottle in her mouth or whatever, and she's like freaking out. And you can only imagine she's just feeling hungry, and I'm feeling terrified that I'm not going to do a good job. So there would be another example of, it's not so much the absence of me trying to see, but I'm filled with my own stuff that spills over in her, right? So that would be a kind of a, also not present in this receptive way, but I'm filled with another thing. So that's where it gets to be about 35 to 45% total. So what happens? This last book we've just finished is called The Power of Showing Up. And it's basically an extension of Parenting from the Inside Out. So that book is available. But basically what it does, and I wrote a whole textbook on this called The Developing Mind, where basically there are 3 kinds of outcomes of parents not being present. When they're present, about 55 to 65% depending on the study, Our parents are present, they have secure attachment for their kids who are attached to them that way. That's fine. We've talked about that. The three kinds of absence, if you will, the opposite of presence, are number one, avoidant attachment, which is the first 20% we were talking about. Those kids, as they grow up, if this is with their primary caregiver, they have the key feature is that they don't have much awareness of their internal world. They don't have much mindsight for the insight part of mindsight. They don't have much awareness of another person's internal world. So if they're in a romantic relationship, it's usually very lonely for their partner. And so they don't have much empathy, right? And they don't have this capacity to go back in memory to recall how their past influenced them. It's quite amazing. So as adults, when we do this narrative analysis of them, you get this thing called a dismissing narrative. They'll say things like, relationships aren't important, you know, give me the next question, hurry up, you know, like this kind of thing. And that's literally 20% of the population. And that's their key feature. Don't remember the past, and it doesn't look like it's trauma. It looks like it's an absence of emotional closeness. And they don't have much reflective ability, meaning they're not aware of their emotions or even sometimes their bodily sensations. It's quite remarkable, actually. And as a therapist who's doing work beyond the research, it isn't just I do a, an hour-and-a-half interview. I have these people in therapy for years. And in a book called Mindsight, for that example, look at the chapter on Stewart, who came as a 90-year-old with this history, and then he did the work as a 90-year-old to change all these things we're talking about. So his wife called me up and said, Dan, did you give Stewart a brain transplant? What happened to this guy? You're her husband of 65 years, And it was just the most amazing thing. And it was all documented and all this kind of stuff. So read the Mindsight for these case examples. The second kind of one that's second in our order, but also in frequency, is called ambivalent attachment. This is the one where parent is intrusive or inconsistently present, basically. And there what you see is those kids, as they grow into adolescence and adulthood, they have a lot of uncertainty. There's a kind of, it isn't the same as just, oh, I'm insecure. It's more like, in a relational sense, they may feel like other people can't meet their needs, or they have too many needs, or something. So there's a kind of, if the avoidant attachment was a disconnection, this ambivalent attachment is more like a confusion. Like, what am I feeling? What are you feeling? What are all this kind of stuff? And so it can be really hard for them internally, like that. So that's that group. And then on top of all that, there's now the third kind of not present, which is when parents are terrifying to their kids and it isn't repaired. So any of us can be terrifying. Let's just put it out there. And then you make a repair beautiful. Repair, repair, repair. So you don't need to be freaking out, oh my God. But if you are doing things that are terrifying to your kid, after today, take it the next step and repair that terror. So when there isn't a repair, children develop what's called a disorganized attachment. And this is the one where they develop something called dissociation, where they have clinical levels of fragmenting the usual continuity of consciousness. At the extreme, they can have one part of them that doesn't talk to another part, that doesn't talk to another part, multiple personality called dissociative identity disorder. That's the extreme. But other variations of this are, I don't feel like I'm real, I feel disconnected from my body, I don't remember stuff. Those are all examples of dissociation that we have shown in my field of attachment research is an outcome of these terrifying experiences. And what comes along with that is these kids have a hard time regulating their emotions and a hard time having mutually rewarding relationships with others. And they, as I mentioned, under stress, they can't reason well. They kind of freak out. So that's disorganized attachment. So those are the, that's 35 to 45% of the population, non-clinical population. So you're talking about, what is that, about 150 million people in this country alone. And the great news, just to put it right out there about knowing this, is that if those people find out that's where I'm at, like if you read Parents from the Inside Out and you go, oh, that's where I'm at, the research shows that if you take the time to reflect on your past, even as you'll see with Stewart, who couldn't remember his past, but we were able to access it, when you reflect on the past and make sense of that past, you can actually integrate your understanding, literally taking differentiated parts, bringing them together in what's called a coherent narrative, where you feel what happened to you. You realize there are longings that were unfulfilled, that you had not only the experiences you had, but the way you adapted to it, sometimes with shame, a feeling that not just like guilt where you did something wrong and you can correct it. Shame is a feeling like you are defective and there's nothing you can do. And so usually shame goes underground, but then pops up in all sorts of very strange ways, like being driven to be the richest person in the world or the most famous person in the world, the most powerful. You know, when you get people like that in therapy, you find often that shame is actually the driving force, because no matter how much they have, they still feel like they're defective, and they keep on trying, instead of dropping into this receptive space of saying, I have enough. How can I actually help other people have a lot? And, you know, in the privacy of therapy, I mean, this is what people can open up in a very tender and vulnerable way to this very painful emotional state of shame, which comes with a lot of these insecure attachment forms. Anyway, so with disorganized attachment, then, whether it's that or avoidant attachment, which is called dismissing in adults, or the ambivalent, which is called entangled or preoccupied for adults, you can show that if this person as an adult takes the time to make sense of their life, they can go from these forms of insecure adult attachment to secure adult attachment. This is the take-home message from this whole talk, is the reason to even dive into this stuff is because you as an adult have the opportunity, now knowing this, to take the steps to make sense of how the past influenced you, make sense of the point where you come with this narrative that makes sense, and I don't mean just rationalizes it away, making sense meaning you sense it, you feel it. And, as Stuart's wife said, you can transform your brain into this new way of being. Ultimately, when people do a lot of these domains of integration I talk about in various settings, including Mindsight, when you do this, you start becoming open to realizing, wow, I'm not just a noun that lives in a body as a separate entity. I am more like an unfolding verb. And I know that sounds weird, but if you just look at the cover story of Scientific American in July 2018, what you find, and I think this is actually related to the mental experience we can have, is that we have two realms we live in. One realm is the Newtonian classical realm of noun-like separate entities, and there's a directionality of change called an arrow of time. But the other realm that's equally real is this quantum realm that's been proven, but that just has different mathematical properties, where things are not entities, they're events. Things are not nouns, they're verbs. Things are not separated, they're deeply interconnected. And what people, in my therapeutic experience and research experience, when they move towards integrating their making sense process, the rigid noun-like definition of a separate self opens up to say, okay, I get about 100 years to live in this body, but now I'm realizing who I am is more than just this body. I am my relationships with other people, in my family, in my neighborhood, in my profession, you know, at my company, in the larger world. And I'm also related to the planet, nature. And that verb-like set of unfoldings where you realize what you do is going to actually have an impact way beyond the years when your body is no longer here. You and your love of people and the planet will continue on. And that's where we comes from, this idea that we're both an internal noun-like me and also a relational verb-like we. And that would be an integrated way of living as a we.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.